Right, good morning everyone, and welcome to ACUTEC's Respect and Protect webinar for GDPR. So first of all, just to introduce ourselves, as myself, Simon G. I'm the Business Development Manager here at ACUTEC, and I am joined by Amy Staniszewski, our Digital Marketing Specialist, who really has put today's event on. So we want to take about 15 to 20 minutes of your time today. And the idea really of this session is to talk about it in two entities, one from a data side of things and your respect for that data, and the other side of security and how you protect that data. So the first thing I'm going to start off with is a little bit of a thought, and I'm only going to give you 15 seconds just to have a quick think about what your thoughts of personal data. I could sing, but I won't.
Yeah, so just a general, what do you classify as personal data? How far do you go with what is personal and what is perhaps business data, for example? Okay, so if we move on now, Simon, talk us through what you would include as in personal data.
Yeah, so for me, it's anything about myself. So it might be my date of birth, it might be my name, it might be things such as email address, it could be my personal address, it could be credit card details, information on spouses. I'm sure a lot of things such as that have come up. We've put a few as an example. I know I've written, I'll pop these up here.
I think there's quite a few different things that we can talk about within that, and I think as well, you know, you can talk about the work email address as well being included within that, because there's a lot of, I think, ground within that of what is personal and what is not, and we'll talk about that a little bit more today. Thank you, Peter, for your suggestion of something that's not in the public domain, but personal data is in the public domain. My name is my personal data, and that is very much in the public domain. So if we move on now, we're going to look at, first, we want to say that today we are not legal experts. We are not solicitors. What we are is an IT company that wants to help people, really. I think, Simon, you wanted to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's such a hot topic at the moment, GDPR, and the more and more people I speak to, the evidence of greyness is very much there, and I can't apologise that we haven't got the answers so much on everything that we cover today. What we want to do is just give you a little bit of background and where we see it, and some of the experiences that we've had as much as anything. Again, just to reiterate that legal obligation, and you know, for the big organisations out there, particularly in the B2C market, one of the things that will be guiding you is to get that legal expertise at this particular point. Okay, what we want to cover off at this stage is just some background information. So, Amy, do you want to talk about what we see here as what GDPR actually stands for and some basics on that?
Yeah, so I think it's always important to sort of start where things are beginning. So within that, you know, GDPR is happening this year now, which is a scary thing to be saying, because I've been looking at this for about a year and a half. So this is being put into place to replace the Data Protection Act and the Data Protection Directive. For any of you that don't know, they were brought into place around 1995 to 1998. That's, you know, 20 years ago. ACUTEC is as old as 1995. That's how long we've been running, and we've seen so many changes in the past 22, 23 years. And I think it reflects the need for that. You know, the world has changed. How we use technology and how we deal with data has changed dramatically. So this is a good thing, whether we like it or not.
You may have employees that are younger than the current Data Protection Act. So that's worth considering, and consider what that was like if you were around then. You know, how people were when they started their jobs at 18 or 21 or whatever, to what they are now, and what's different, particularly in IT, obviously.
Yeah, of course. And I think, I've put it on this slide because I think that's probably one of the reasons why everybody here is the talk of fines. And I think there's been a lot of scaremongering of, you know, it's going to be 4% of your turnover, it's going to be 20 million euros. And I think some people are terrified by that, and then other people are very much like, oh, don't be silly, I'm not going to be fined 20 million euros because my turnover is 2 million, for example. But I think what's important with that is to think it is it is based upon the severity of what has happened. So if you think about, yes, 4% of your turnover, that could cripple you. And I think, Simon, you like to say it's turnover, not
Absolutely.
profit.
You know, so many people overlook the fact that that is your turnover of the business. So 4% of that, you know, could well be more than your profit, or well, no one wants to give their profit away. Let's just put it like that.
Yeah.
So the idea, what we want to offer is how we can make sure you don't have to pay that.
Exactly.
Black and white.
And I think it's important as well to state, because I did have a conversation with a business about a month or two ago, and they thought that it had nothing to do with them and they weren't needing to look at GDPR. They were a business of about 30 people, B2B. They are very much needing to look at GDPR. So, you know, double check that. Even if somebody tells you, oh, it doesn't affect you, I would seriously double and triple check that, because there's a lot of scaremongering going on, and it's best to get the facts and not the fantastical stories that I'm hearing from some people at the moment. So
yeah, I think it's worth just adding a little bit there. It does affect anybody. It does affect everybody. How much that will be investigated, we have to sit here and say we don't know at this point. However, what we're trying to do is protect that. And don't get me wrong, I have no doubt that over the next 12 months, there'll be a lot of ironing out here. What the important thing is, there's an awareness from yourselves, and you are doing something at this point.
Yeah. So the next slide I like to use just to show sort of the vastness of GDPR and to show how much bigger it is than just data protection. One of the big things within it is it's a global thing. It will affect people if you are in the EU. If you are sold something from someone in America, so for example, I recently bought a phone case from America, they would need to be GDPR compliant because I am an EU citizen. So it's not just us in the UK, it's not just the EU, it's worldwide that this is going to affect. Obviously, there is now the introduction of penalties. These were in place before, you could have been fined previously, but the penalties are more strict now. It's more of a regulated thing, and of course there are obviously strengthened conditions for how you can process data, which we will go into. Simon, do you have anything else to add to that?
I think the one thing that I would kind of add to that is, generally speaking, and whether it touches this slide or not, I think as Amy's kind of reached on there, is that the scope of this is far greater. Technology, for example, wasn't really in that data privacy area.
No.
It is now, and it has to be, and it should be, and there's a lot of positive things about this. Unfortunately, everything that the press will let you believe is very negative, but the purpose is very much to protect ourselves, protect us as well. So we do. There should be a positive spin, as much as, you know, most people look at, am I going to get a heavy fine?
Yes.
But let's try and look at positives and how we can actually improve processes.
I think in terms of looking at it in a positive light, I think you need to see yourself as a data subject and think about people like Facebook and Google who are using your data for commercial gain. And that's what this is about, really. But obviously it does apply to everybody, so that's why we're looking at this in such detail today. So if we move on to how does it affect you, there's a couple of things that you need to consider. One is, are you B2B or are you B2C? Because there are different aspects to that. Simon, do you want to?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would put, you know, again, it's about priorities as well. The initial point will be that B2C are affected more than B2B. However, please do not take this as me saying that it does not affect B2B. But obviously, because you are dealing with consumers, that protection layer that we're talking about and protecting ourselves, that's going to be the priority. The other thing that I must point out is that the purpose of this is not to stop your business trading or to affect your business trading. And I think if we look at some of the examples in terms of, we'll put there, you will hold data and the sort of data that you'll be holding. So yes, you'll hold employee data, you'll hold client data, financial data. And I know from conversations that I've had with people already, the concern is, well, what am I able to keep and what shouldn't I keep?
I think within that there is a lot of questions about, well, you know, we have to hold it for this reason, and it's like, but that's fine. Nobody's saying you can't hold the data. It's just that you have to justify your reasons why, which we'll go into. To hold data is perfectly fine. You've just got to have a reason to do so.
Yeah, I mean, if I just use an example, is it acceptable for ACUTEC, and I'm as an employee at ACUTEC, to hold my details? Absolutely it is. I'm employed by that company, so it's relevant that they have my name and my address and my phone number. It's relevant that they have a next of kin, because there is a reason for that, and also their number, because I provided that with it. If I was no longer working for ACUTEC, is it still acceptable? Again, there'll be an argument here where yes, it is, and it's then how long that's acceptable to keep it, and who has access to that data.
Yeah. Just to point, Lucy, I can see your question. We'll look at all the questions at the end. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat box. In terms of that relevancy of holding data, on this webinar, we are not going to go into this is the legal basis of why you can hold data, or this is the reasons why you can be processing data. That's for a bigger time slot, but we do have a document for you to take away to have a look at that. But I think one of the big things we talk about with relevancy is an example that I had. So I applied for university, 7 years ago. I applied for 5 different ones, chose the one I wanted to go to, and then probably about 3 or 4 years later, I got an email off one of the ones that I rejected telling me that they had my data and they'd lost it. A laptop had been stolen from a car. Looking at it now, looking back at it, I sit there and think, well, why were you still holding my data? And that's what GDPR is about. It's that justification of, well, why do you still have that? What's your reason for holding that still? What's your justification? But you can still justify it. So, for example, I know that data was then used in data analytics. So, for example, within that, it's a business reason to use it to gain insight. So you just have to justify what you're using it.
I think there's 2 key points here.
Yeah.
You should know where your data is. Now that sounds really easy, and that may well be the biggest challenge of all. I know one of my colleagues always points out there will be somebody in your business who is saving a file locally, and how are you going to know about that? So it's how you can try and follow that process really, so you know where that data is, because then you can make measurable decisions on who has access to it and is it responsible to keep it. And again, where we talk about responsibility, it's asking yourselves that question: why have we got that data? And generally speaking, if you think there is a good reason, it is more than likely acceptable.
Exactly. So if we move on, I've just got 2 little points here of what you need to consider. So it's the risks to the data if you choose to hold it, and your reasons why you hold that data. And that's what really this webinar is about today: respect and protect. You need to respect that data. You need to think about the reasons why you hold it, your justification for holding it, and write that down to a certain extent, and have a written, what we're doing as a company is having a written document that says this is why we hold that and this is our justification for that. But then on the other hand, it's also protecting that data because you have chosen to hold it, so it's your responsibility to look after it. So if we move on, as we said as well within that, we are not putting in all the legal jargon today because we will bore you, because quite frankly it's a boring topic and this is only a 20-minute session. So within that, we are just here. This is our new guide. It was published last week. It will have all of the detail in it for you. If you have any questions or want to talk to someone more fully about that, then please do get in touch. I am more than happy to have that conversation with you. So Simon, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I always like to put the financial implication on things because I think it really hits a strong note, and I promise that, well, I am sort of scaremongering here. Relatively recently, be it, when I say that was 3 or 4 years ago now, there was a big major company, and I'm not going to say who it was at this stage, I'll let you think about this yourself, and they got done because their data was compromised. They got hacked essentially. The reason why they got hacked is really because their security levels were not up to standard. Hopefully I'm not saying anything that I shouldn't be saying now. At the time they got fined £400,000. Now I'll be honest with you, they were a massive company, so be it that was a lot of money, it really wasn't. If they were to get fined with a maximum penalty, and I can't say whether they would or not, that fine with GDPR in place be 70 million.
Yeah, I think it's important with that 4% turnover. That is the higher one. It's whichever is higher. It doesn't have to be capped at 20 million. Some people do think it is whichever is greater. Does anyone?
If anyone wants to, does anyone know the company? We're not going to reveal it
No.
today because it's not appropriate to do so. But this is a very, very factual story, and I think it's just worth considering that. And okay, you want to put that into your own business organisation to think the effect of what that value could be.
Of course. So, within that, I want to talk not just about the risk of GDPR, but also the risk of the actual data breaches and what goes on, because I think, yes, you can turn around and say, oh, there's a financial implication, I'm going to be fined, but there is a reason why this is being put into place. It's not just being put into place because the ICO wants your money. It's, to protect yourself as well and your data subjects. So within that, the first thing I want to talk about is your data. What would you do if you had a data breach? You've chosen to hold the data that you have. What would happen if you lost it? I talk to a lot of charities. It's something that we specialise in, is doing IT for charities, and they hold a lot of sensitive information. And if that was breached, the chaos from that would just be, insane really, because so many different, people have different issues that could be made public in the public domain. So that's something for you to consider. The other thing is the financial aspect, of course, which is the fines. But also, if you're not protecting data properly, you could also have ransomware attacks where you lose data from that aspect. But also your reputation, because as I said, if you lose sensitive data and you have to reveal that, your reputation will be severely damaged. And if we talk about the company that Simon was just discussing, in the first 3 months after they experienced their data breach, they lost 100,000 customers, which nobody wants, do they, Simon?
No, absolutely not. We know how hard it is to get a new business, and keep that business is so important, so we never want to lose it. So yeah, the fines are concerning. The reputation can actually be more damning.
Of course. So I think for us now, I think we're going to move on to what we know about GDPR, where we can help, and what we know about the most, which is security. Because while we've talked about respecting the data, the big issue, of course, as well is protecting that data. So Simon, do you want to talk a little bit more about this?
So where we're coming from, if your data, if you are hacked, essentially, the word compromise is the one I was looking for. If your data is compromised, then what should you do? Well, the first thing, once GDPR comes in, then if there is a use their term or their destruction, loss, unauthorised disclosure of access to personal data, you must report that to the ICO. That's the first thing that should happen, and there is a time there where it has to be done within 72 hours.
I'd like to point out as well, if you don't inform the ICO within 72 hours, you could also experience half of those fines again. So it's up to 10%, not 10%, up to 10 million euros or 2% of your global turnover for not informing the ICO that that's happened.
So we're going to touch on specific levels of security. The one thing that we always like to preach at this point really is that perfect security is impossible. Failing to try is unacceptable. We no longer live in a world in IT specifically where we can say you are 100% protected. I always like to throw this analogy into your own home, if you like. If you can close the window, you can lock the window, you can close your door, you can set the alarm, lock the door, have a dog, whatever you want to do. All of these things are possible. Does it mean you're not going to get broken into? What you are doing is reducing the risk, essentially. And that's what we have to kind of talk about from an IT. We can have antivirus, spam, firewall, and they're all absolutely necessary in that infrastructure. It does not 100% mean you are not going to be compromised. Okay, but failing to do anything, that's where the problem is, and that's where, as we see it, as the GDPR comes in, the not doing anything is where you could be subject to fines, etc.
Basically, within that, you're no longer allowed to say, "Oh, if we get hacked, it's fine," because before GDPR, it was your risk to take. It was your risk to take if you had downtime, if you did have a ransomware where you had to pay ransom demand, or if you lost however much in a phishing scam. But what GDPR I think really hits home is that you hold data and you are responsible for that data. So if you have a breach, so for example, if you do have a ransomware attack and people's personal details are exposed to that hacker, then that is your responsibility, and you should be making the appropriate actions to make sure that that is protected, and that is what this is about. So if we move on to how data
I know
breaches
time is
happen.
moving on, so I hope everyone's okay to stay on. But let's just think about how the breaches happen. I'm going to just go through some specific examples. So it might be losing a phone. Again, there's a lot of data on your phone. It might be because passwords have been compromised. We've used that term hacking and phishing. Again, any of these terms that come up, if you are not aware, we're more than happy to kind of have a conversation offline regarding this. It could be that emails to personal email addresses, something slipped through there, a laptop has been left on a train. There's lots and lots of examples. A lot of these are down to an individual user, which is interesting. If we look at a slightly bigger set of information, things that we should be doing, and the one thing again that I always kind of like to push on the GDPR level is that, do you know what you've got as an organisation? Again, I speak to a lot of clients and prospects as well, and they're not all aware of what they've got, and that is where it's no longer appropriate. You need to know what you've got. You don't need to know the inside and outsides of how a firewall is configured, for example, but you need to know that something is in place, and that's right. So the first thing that we always talk about is a firewall. Make sure it's an appropriate firewall. I'm not going to go into brands, makes, etc. If you've got a concern, please talk to us about it, but it should be a good software or a current software supported firewall where patches are being run as well. You talk about things like patch management. Again, I could give you examples of where certain people have been compromised, and big organisations that was big media press as well, where servers, for example, weren't patched in terms of things like security updates weren't loaded on there. Something ACUTEC are very proud to say that none of our clients got hit by that.
With WannaCry, yes, back in May with the NHS, yeah. So if we move on as well within that to anti-spam, Simon, what can you tell us about anti-spam?
Yeah, I'd like to think that everyone has anti-spam, everyone knows about anti-spam, but it's not true. This is down to making sure that the appropriate traffic isn't coming through to your email account and not hitting those users. This is stopping those unwanted emails and dangerous emails, and there are now different levels of anti-spam. So again, yes, you might have an anti-spam. Is it a business appropriate anti-spam solution in 2018? Because if it's one that was in 2015, it might not be any good anymore.
I think it is important to say that things are being developed all the time to attack us. We talk about 0-day threats within the industry of, once something's created, there's nothing to protect it at that point. Something has to be developed to do that, and things are being done all the time. So within that, we'll also talk about antivirus, because I know you like to talk about business level antivirus as well.
Yeah, again, a lot of people say, yeah, that's fine, I've got antivirus, and again, almost pad it off and move to the next stage. Again, I don't want to make it too big a feature of antivirus. It's an important product. Again, it's about having that business level antivirus solution. I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of people there that might have free antivirus, and my advice to you is that is not an appropriate level of antivirus. As a business and at home, get a decent AV solution. Again, if you want to speak to us, we can give you some tips on that.
Yeah. Someone's just said I recommend the ACUTEC anti-spam solution, which is
Thank
lovely. So we'll just move on to end user education, which we always say is the most important thing. Simon, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think the one difference with all the other things that we can talk about is that you can put a system and a solution in place and it will do a lot of the protection. However, the hardest thing is that the end user, because the other thing is the end user doesn't need to worry about. There's also an end user. factor. So there is a big thing, things like phishing emails as an example. Knowing what emails are appropriate to open and what aren't. Again, I'm not going to sit and talk to you for half an hour or an hour in what is a good email to open and what isn't. But I think it's such a strong piece of information that you should be rolling out to your users. Again, we can give you guidance on that, or speak to your current IT provider saying, look, you need to help us out here in terms of preventing our user opening unnecessary emails or going to links on websites. Anything else you want to add on that, Amy?
I think within end user education, it's just that thing of it's your last line of defence. Once everything's got passed, it's up to the decisions of the people around you, and making sure that everyone from, you know, a finance assistant to someone who just has emails, perhaps a scaffolder on the road, you know, they all have to be aware of the risks of using technology now. And I think, I know Irfan, who's our commercial director, likes to say, it is not acceptable to say, I don't understand IT anymore in this day and age.
That's a hard message, but it is the reality these days. So, now then, again, and I've said it and I'm going to say it again, still, something can get through. So, what we also talk about is the benefit of a good backup and DR solution.
I think within backup and DR as well, which is disaster recovery, it's that whole thing of this will actually probably not help you with GDPR, this bit. This is for your benefit. This is not to save you from a fine, this is to save you from downtime.
Yes, absolutely. We see it as super important. You know, if something was to sneak through, you know, and suddenly you got some, for example, ransomware and it's asking you for money, first of all, don't pay the fine. That is my first advice, and speak to your IT provider. What the hope is there is that you have a good backup solution. If you have a backup solution, it should also be tested. Yeah. Think about the consequence of downtime, and what you want to do is avoid as much of that as possible, because that costs a fortune.
Exactly. And then the last one, Simon, of our 7 steps.
Yeah, this is an important one. Everyone will probably sit and say they have some level of IT policy. What we try and educate people with here is, yes, you might have a big document that your employees have signed in some level of handbook. The question I always have to ask is, have they read it and did it make sense to them? So we like to kind of say, well, you should almost have a headline IT policy. Mm-hmm. It should be on one piece of A4. It should have, let's say, 10 points on there. Even if you want a more detailed appendix on that, that's absolutely fine. But have some level of IT policy which is legible. So it might be that you don't want people going onto certain sites within your organisation. And yes, you can block those. It could be, you know, some behaviour you want to educate people with. Put it down in the IT policy, make it so clear that everyone can understand it, because actually it's protecting your organisation, not them protecting, or you protect your organisation by that person signing a form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So within that, I think it's, if we wrap up, I know we've gone over a little bit and we've still got to answer your questions, but if we wrap up, as we've said, perfect security is impossible, but failing to try is just unacceptable now under GDPR. You need to be thinking about your security and what you have in place, and whether, you know, it's not just about protecting your business and its finances anymore, it's about protecting other people's information, and that's what this is about, and that's why you've got to comply with GDPR. It is your responsibility to understand GDPR. Now, within this, I've got a couple of questions that people have asked that we will go into this a little bit more. But it is your responsibility for your company to understand it. You can't throw it onto other third parties and things that might deal with your data. It is the company's responsibility to be dealing with it. It's important to ensure that all your staff are familiar with GDPR and what you can and can't do with data. You know, you can't just sit there and think, okay, one person's responsible for it and that's it. Everybody in your organisation needs to know what this means and what the effect of it can be if you're not compliant. Of course, consider the dangers for your organisation. How do data breaches happen? You know, we are going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a moment, because I know somebody's asked a question about it. But now I just want to talk about some actions that you can take to go against this and make sure that you are doing what you need to do. So if I just move on quickly, I'm going to skip that slide and I'm just going to go on to something called Cyber Essentials. Simon, do you want to talk a little bit more about this? I think it's important to discuss here.
Well, I think the first and easiest thing to say about Cyber Essentials is that it's supported by the ICO. Now, the ICO are essentially the governing body
for GDPR.
For GDPR. So there is a synergy between the two. And what Cyber Essentials is it's talking about the security really of your IT network, your organisation's IT. It's a certification which is annually expected to be done annually, and it's £300 a year. So it's not a big amount of money. What I would say in this is if you are Cyber Essentials, and therefore you have that tick box and you've gone through the time to fill that Cyber Essentials questionnaire, which essentially it is, and your data again is compromised.
And you've passed the accreditation.
And you've passed the accreditation, and you have been investigated by GDPR. What I would say is you are going to be looked at in a much better light than if you haven't. From our point of view, if I take GDPR out of the equation, a lot of what is on the Cyber Essentials is good guidance anyway. So when we talk about respect and good things that happen, you know, it's a good stepping stone to being GDPR compliant. Yes, there's also just a sensibleness, and you've actually, from your organisation's point of view, took sensible steps. Again, what I would advise if anyone's thinking about this is, you know, please speak to us. There may be, you know, things that you need to do to get to that stage before kind of committing to submitting your answers to that questionnaire.
Definitely. But as we said before, it is supported by the ICO. It's that tick box that says, oh, actually, that they have thought about this. They have taken the steps to try. They have not failed to try at doing their security. So within that, I want you to be GDPR ready. I don't want you to get a fine. And there's 4 months. There's just 4 months to get sorted. And, you know, that is not a lot of time when you think of what everything to consider. So don't fail to try. You know, think about your security. Go back today and say to whoever is responsible for your IT, whether that's you, whether that's your IT manager, your finance director, or an IT company that you have externally, just say, have we got the 7 steps that ACUTEC say that I absolutely definitely need to have as a basic? Would we pass Cyber Essentials? You know, think about these things, because as we said, you are responsible for this now.
Can I just jump in on one other thing on Cyber Essentials? A lot of businesses want people to be Cyber Essentials before they can now quote for that business.
Yes.
I think that will be a growing curve of things as much as anything. It's quite government orientated at the moment, but I think that will expand as time goes on. I think
within that as well, it's supply chain. So if you supply to someone who supplies to the government, you have to have it now.
Yeah.
So eventually it will catch up with you, I think. The other thing I just want to add, just as a last thing, is download our GDPR guide. It is completely free. It has been created and written especially for you to understand more about what you need to know. As I said, we haven't gone into the legal basis for why you can hold data and all of that kind of thing. That is in the guide, and I am more than happy to have a conversation with you after this, or once you've looked at the guide, to say, okay, well, this is what this means. So yeah, so moving on. 25th of May 2018, that's 4 months away, and it's not a lot of time. So say hello to us today if you would like to, if you need our help or you want to discuss this more, we are more than happy to. That's my email address, so I am always happy to have a chat about that. And that's our phone number, so please say hello today. We're now going to just mute ourselves for just a moment to answer any of your questions. I know there are some in the box, so we'll just have a quick look through those and then also answer any extra ones that come our way. So thank you. Hello everyone, I've come back. Right, so let's have a look at these questions then. So one of the first questions I've had is, can you still communicate B2B in the same way, or do you need to opt in consent for that? There are 6 legal bases for why you hold data under GDPR. And there's different ones for that. So for example, one is if you need that data to be in a contract with somebody. So for example, the person that's asked this question will be in a contract for us for IT support. So within that, the legal basis is that we have a contract. But there are other legal bases. One is consent, which is the one you've mentioned, and the other is legitimate interest. There are 3 other ones, but I won't go into those. So under B2B, you can say that you have a legitimate interest as an organisation to hold that data, but there are extra things that you need to consider within that. So for example, one of the things that are stated under GDPR is, can this be done in any other way? Is there any other way that you don't have to hold that data? And you just need to justify in a written document, say, which is what we're doing, no, because of this and this reason. As long as you can justify it, and as long as you can say a legitimate interest for the business holding that data. Under B2B, I'd like to say very specifically that B, then realistically that should be fine. It does say in the actual regulation, legitimate interest is a perfect example for direct marketing, but you have to be very careful with B2B and B2C and make sure that you have looked very carefully at the guidelines of whether you could do this a different way and that you've ticked all the boxes within that, which are on the ICO's website. The next question is, do you need any changes to data sharing agreements when sharing data with a sister company? Within that, you would probably just need to update your terms and conditions and your privacy policy, but that's something for you to discuss with the sister company. Data sharing isn't particularly our specialism, but you are responsible for that data, so obviously you need to make sure that everybody's aware of what that data is being used for. We've then had a question that says, when it comes to making business contacts, how can you ensure you are compliant when receiving business cards without showing a privacy notice, getting explicit consent for adding them to a contact list? As I said previously, legitimate interest, yeah, have it in your terms and conditions that you will hold marketing data for legitimate interest. But within that, there is that aspect of giving a business, you've given a business card, they've given it you, that's not consent. But, just write it down and think about it. Just sit down is what my advice would be. Sit down and think, look through the ICO's website and say, am I ticking these boxes? That's what I would do in that situation. But that is a difficult one. I do understand with that. The next question we've had is about children's data for children under the age of 16 in terms of parental consent. Education is not our market particularly, so I'm not going to say that we can fully answer this question. I do believe the age of consent for children giving it themselves is actually 13 now, but I would definitely just go and look on the ICO's website. There is a whole section for holding children's data. That would be my advice to you. Next, I feel a bit like a parrot going through all these. Let's have a look. What else have we got here? How will this impact purchase lists of data? Tools like Clearbit that give insight into organisations and work email addresses, how will they continue and who does the responsibility lie with? I am not aware of the tool Clearbit, so I couldn't really give you an answer on that. You'd have to talk to your data provider and you have to think about what's your justification for holding that data. Is it consent or is it legitimate interest? That's a decision that you've got to make as a company. Marie Jenkins has asked, would Cyber Essentials accreditation help? As we've said, yes, it would. If you'd like more information on that, Marie Jenkins, then please do come and talk to us. Somebody else has asked about sole traders. There's a bit of a grey area within that. There is a little bit that says about sole traders. I can't really answer that question if I'm honest.
I know there's some certain that there are some loopholes, for example, based on the amount of turnover. I'm not sure off the top of my head what those are.
We don't tend to deal with sole traders.
Yeah, purely because it's not our typical market. I'm going to be very honest with you.
We don't want to give you the wrong information.
So it won't just be no, it doesn't affect you or it does affect you.
Yeah.
There'll be a few other things that are going to have a factor on that.
Somebody else has asked, do you have a definition of what a breach is? There is a definition of what a breach is in our GDPR guide. So which is at https www.acutec.co.uk/GDPR-guide/. But within that, there are a number of different things that can class as a breach. Data loss, being hacked. I definitely look into the ICO's website looking at this. If you need any help, we can take that offline and talk about it a little bit more, but it's quite a long conversation. We've also had, are you required to inform the subjects of the data breach as well as the ICO? If so, are there any timescales for this? I'll be honest with this, I've seen this a couple of times and it's a bit of a grey area. I've seen, yeah, in some cases, yes, you do. In other cases, I've seen if it will cause harm to that person, so if it will cause them distress in some way, I would look into that. I'd just double check on the ICO's website on that in particular. Or there is, I will say, the ICO do have a hotline for small businesses. If you need to talk to someone about a specific question that is specific to your organisation, because we all do different things and we all deal with data in different ways, there is a hotline for you to talk to the ICO for specific questions. And then there's that lovely person saying that they recommend ACUTEC's anti-spam solution. Thank you very much. And then somebody else has asked, sorry to be so specific, but if a customer gives out their account login password, does that become our responsibility? In what context? I'd have to ask in that. It's really their data to a certain extent they've given it out. I'd need to know the context for that to understand what you mean.
It would also depend on what that gives access to as well.
Yeah. And then we've been asked, if your servers are run by another company, are you responsible at all for any hacks? You are still responsible for any hacks, because I think the way to see it is that Simon could go to one of our clients and say, you need to replace your server. And you could turn around and say no, because that's going to cost me too much money, or for whatever reason you say no. That is still your responsibility. Yes, to a certain extent, you know, there are some level of processing involved, but you are responsible for the security that is applied to your systems.
I think that might be relevant to if they're paying another company who hosts their servers.
Okay.
Again, there will be an element of liability on yourself. It will depend who your hosting is with. I am going to name drop here. If we host for people, so for those who are interested in cloud, 99% of the stuff that we tend to deal with is Microsoft Azure. One of the reasons that we do that is because it is compliant with GDPR legislation. Yeah. So the way that that's protected, not everyone's will be, and again it goes back to your responsibility. So you may want to ask those vendors of where that data is held and what level of compliance that is.
We have an interesting question next, which seems to be from another IT provider. If you have access to customers' data and are responsible for the upkeep of the servers, but do not touch or see any of it other than having access, does that make you a processor? That's a question we'll take offline, to be honest, because that's obviously quite a complicated thing that we'd need to talk to you about. So, and obviously it's also not relevant to everybody else on the thing, so we'll talk to you about that offline if you need to talk to anyone about that. Next question that we have had is, can individuals provide other people's data, for example, email addresses? Thanks. I'd need to know the context of what you mean by individuals providing other people's data, but either way you're holding that data, so you are responsible for it, is what I would say, but I'd need to know a bit more context about what you mean by that.
Again, there has to be a trust element. Yeah. Of why is that data being shared?
Yeah, definitely. And then we've had another question from Lucy. Do you provide any overview slides or webinar recordings that is suitable to deliver to the whole company so that all employees are aware and have a level of understanding? Lucy, what I'm going to say to you is the best thing to do is to talk to Steve about that, and we'll sort something out for you. I think is the best thing to say within that. And then we've also got, can you recommend any sources for a GDPR policy document for an employee handbook? I will always say go to the ICO, because at the end of the day, that is the fact. That is not, there is nothing on the ICO's website that is been blown out of proportion or has been swayed by somebody else. If within that, what I can say for our GDPR policy document, which we're looking at the moment, we've gone through the ICO's website, we've stated what data we've got, and we've literally just gone through the ICO's recommendations and said, right, we've covered that, we've covered that, we've covered that, and that's how we've gone about it. So my recommendation for that would be to look at the ICO's website.
Yeah, we again, just to add on that, we have to be a little bit careful going back to that legality side of things, where we can't necessarily just share that information.
No.
You know, we're happy to speak to people and, where appropriate, give guidance. And yeah, by all means, if they can learn from what we've had to spend a lot of time, that's absolutely fine. We would not be prepared to say that is a legal document that we can provide to you. Who knows, there could be a loophole. If we share that, then we're liable.
Yeah, at the end of that, it's your responsibility to make that policy for your company, because every company is different. So within that, that's just my advice of what we've done is gone through the ICO's website. That's, you know, it's fact on there. You don't have any loopholes there. And then we've had somebody else ask, is there a compliance checklist available anywhere? Kind of. There's obviously the ICO's website, which is a great resource, but there's not really a, yes, you are compliant, yes, you are compliant if you've done that. So I would go on the ICO's website and have a look at that one. And then somebody else has asked, are we liable for data sharing between agencies, vulnerable persons? I would need a bit more context for that to understand exactly what you're asking. So I'm sorry about that. If you want to contact us, that's fine. Would you mail out to customers to reassure and give them chance to opt out of any further mailers? You're legally required to have an opt-out on the bottom of your email anyway.
A big factor on this would be B2C and B2B as well.
Yes. But what, yeah, I'd have to consider whether you're B2B, whether you're B2C. You should have an opt-out on any emails you send out anyway. But I'd just obviously review the ICO's website, review what you've got in place and how your organisation operates. And then we've got another one. Let's have a look. Does GDPR have any effect on cold calling or cold mailing when direct marketing? Again, as we said, it's all down to B2B and B2C. You need to review that. As I said, legitimate interest can be used for B2B if you tick all the right boxes that are available on the ICO's website. So I do believe that's the very last question. If anyone has any more, then please do get in touch. Again, as we said, the best things that we can recommend are looking at Cyber Essentials, looking at the 7 steps of cybersecurity. You know, those are your basic, absolute, definite needs, and you need to really look at whether you've got those or not and question the people that are responsible for it. But apart from that, thank you very much for today.
Yes, thank you.
Do get in touch if you have any questions or any further concerns. Thank you very much. Bye.
Goodbye.